she saw the ceiling of the orphanage's attic. For little Ayla, it was another start to a hard day in this not very pleasant place. She took off her pajamas, which were at least in pretty decent condition, and changed into her worn-out everyday dress. She caught herself thinking that even though it was old, it was still wearable. Her day, as always, begins with preparing breakfast for all the children in this orphanage. Ayla was very tired of all this. She literally fell asleep on the go before they cooked in turns, but now this responsibility fell entirely on her fragile shoulders. If only she could eat her fill of what she had prepared herself, the girl thought sadly, yawning and thinking about her life, then maybe there wouldn't be such a strong sense of injustice. A menacing gray-haired man walked past and said something that sounded like a remark, asking if Ayla's portion was really that big, more than usual, but then told her to just sit down and eat. The girl began to look for a free place among the other children, who by this time were already sitting happily and talking to each other. She was able to find a place for herself, and also quickly finished her portion since it was small, but the feeling of hunger did not disappear. As Ayla was heading towards the exit, the same menacing man appeared on her path again and began to talk to her in a raised voice. He ordered her to go and clean up after the others, since she had already eaten. The girl could not argue with him because he was the director of this orphanage. She simply lowered her eyes sadly and agreed with him. Her next duty was to clean the dining room after breakfast, and this whole story has been her daily life ever since. At such moments she felt very sad and hurt. She remembered with trepidation the moments from the past when she was called Little Ayla. A year ago, the girl was in an accident in South Korea and woke up in this body. She soon realized that this place was the setting of a novella she had once read. She was afraid to be in this body, because she assumed what fate might await her. Now she was nothing more than an addition. Now her new name was Rita. She remembered the plot of the novel well, and fortunately, this story would only begin in 10 years. But what was the point of all this if she wasn't even the protagonist? While the girl was going about her usual business and duties, she was called out by a female voice, who addressed her as Black Hair. Rita recognized the voice. It was Lily. She didn't answer that girl, but only thought about what she needed this time. The girl, looking serious, said that our main character was being called to the principal's office. These words frightened the girl to some extent. She was surprised, because she had never been called to the principal before, and she didn't know why children were called there at all. Lily pounced on the poor Ayla for daring to ask her something. She screamed at her, "Who does this filthy black hair think she is?" And then Lily immediately hurried away from the room where Rita continued to stand. The girl was not shocked. She was used to this kind of behavior from the girl. She just thought, what kind of a bad character is she? Is it really impossible to treat all people normally? Rita approached the director's office, knocked quietly, and asked permission to enter. First she said that it was Rita, and then added, "Blackhead." The man opened the door. He was again in an angry state. As always when he saw the girl, she said that he would no longer tell her that she had no name, and again called her a black-haired girl. Rita wanted to object, even though it was pointless. She started to say that it was written that way in the documents, but he didn't even let the little girl finish speaking. He ordered her to shut up and go to the market for groceries. She asked the principal if it was not Lily's turn today, to which the principal again shouted that she had no right to argue, and added that Lily was buying new clothes today, so his decision was indisputable. He didn't stop shouting and added the phrase that the girl wasn't doing anything anyway. Rita's fists clenched from the injustice, but she couldn't say anything. She was offended to hear such words that she was doing nothing, although all the work in the shelter was hers. But whether in Korea or here, her situation has not changed at all. Injustice makes her furious, but she doesn't have the courage to run away. She just sits alone in her room every night and cries quietly so that no one can hear. After all, if she is caught escaping, she will definitely be locked in a warehouse for a week, and besides, all the people here avoid black-haired women. That is why, wherever Rita goes, she will not be welcome everywhere. It is very difficult to come up with something in such a situation. And now she has already arrived in the city to the market to buy food. In crowded places, the girl always wore a cloak with a hood to hide her dark hair. At the market, she looked around carefully. From all sides, the traders were shouting fresh fish, delicious pastries, and other things. Whoever had what, Rita decided to take a little walk, since the weather was good that day. But when she started to move forward, she suddenly stopped and narrowed her eyes, as if something was stopping her. She felt completely uncomfortable and painful walking in these tiny shoes. And suddenly someone shouted, "Oh, look, it's that damn dark-haired girl." Someone finally noticed that a strand of dark hair was visible from under the hood. She heard how all the people were talking about her, and this was, of course, very unpleasant. She couldn't even buy vegetables in peace. People also said that this was a bad sign, and that from now on sales would not go well because of this girl. They believed that she only brought bad luck. She finally reached the vegetable stall she needed, greeted them sweetly, and said she had come to pick up some ingredients. The young man also smiled and asked why Rita had come to buy groceries again today, to which she replied that Lily was buying new clothes with the director today. The guy was a little confused by this. He said that it seemed to him that Rita needed new clothes more than Lily. The girl herself understood this perfectly well, but did not respond to it. The young man went to collect everything that was needed for the girl and treated her to something, saying that his wife had asked him to give the treat specifically to Rita. Mrs. Megan kept telling her husband about it. The girl was delighted, because such an attitude towards her is a great rarity, and this plum in the girl's hand simply shimmered in the sunlight. She started eating, and the merchant was worried whether Rita would be able to carry the package alone, because this time it turned out to be quite heavy. She replied that she could definitely handle it, and the man, stroking the girl on the head, added that if she wanted more plums, she shouldn't be shy about coming in, because he always had a treat for Rita. The walk took longer than the girl thought, and she began to speed up her pace so as not to be late to the shelter. She was very worried about being late, because the director's punishments were always very severe. She was in such a hurry that she did not notice the person in front of her. They collided, causing Rita to fall to the ground, and all the contents of the package were scattered all over the street. She quickly got to her feet and began to apologize for what had happened, but inside she was more afraid that now he would definitely be late. But what was the girl's surprise when the man she encountered began to help her collect food from the ground? She even froze from such a gesture and did not believe that someone on the street was helping someone like her, a girl with black hair. Having calmed down a little, she continued to sit on the ground and look at this young man, but he was also wearing a hood, which is why she could not see his face. Rita thanked him for his help, and he extended his hand to help her up. He asked where she lived, assuming that it was somewhere nearby, but the girl replied that she lived in the Risen orphanage, which was quite far from here. The young man was surprised by this, and the girl immediately added that it was time for her to go, otherwise she might get into trouble. After this conversation, the girl thanked him several more times for his help, as she was surprised by such an attitude. As she began to move away, walking towards the shelter, the young man stopped her. He asked the girl what her name was, to which she replied that her name was Rita, but she had no last name, just Rita. "Okay, Rita, be careful on the way back," he said in a mysterious voice, but continued to stand in place, not going anywhere. He looked after the girl, and when she was already far enough away, he said, "I will come for you soon, my daughter." Then he called out the name Kyle. Meanwhile, the man was already standing behind him. He told the second man that they had to go to the Risen shelter tomorrow. He clearly noticed something about this girl. Purple eyes, as well as incredible magical power emanated from the very essence of this little girl. He also said that it was not easy to find her, but he immediately realized that this girl was his lost daughter, to which Kyle replied that he would immediately make preparations. Torn clothes, shoes that didn't fit, calloused hands, a hunched-over, frightened figure. These thoughts haunted the Duke. It made him very angry that while he was trying so hard to find his lost daughter, she was being treated so badly, and it couldn't be left like that. "My beloved daughter, I will soon take you home," he said decisively and looked into the distance. When I got back to the shelter, Rita immediately went to bed, as she was very tired after the whole day. But as always, it was too much of a burden for a child. Sometimes she dreams of her past life, and then Rita often wakes up in tears. She dreams that a young couple is standing in front of her. They are thinking about the fact that the child is a little different from the photo. They say that the girl looks gloomy and come to the conclusion that she is unlikely to suit them. The director of the shelter says that she is completely useless. Moreover, she is almost always sullen. He clearly does not like this. He also says that no one will ever love her. And Rita thinks a lot. Is it really true that there is not a single person in the whole world who can accept and love a child like her? All this upsets and disappoints the girl very much. If the God who sent her here really exists, then she was asking very much, "Please, let me not be alone anymore." This was her only and most cherished wish. The next morning, she woke up already very tired. Perhaps it was because of the dream she had seen the night before. The girl walked into the common room and heard the other children happily discussing something. They talked about someone having to come and made various suggestions, but they didn't know who it would actually be. And suddenly the heroine is noticed by that same Lily, and she says with hostility that Rita is really going to meet and greet an aristocrat in such a terrible state. Rita was surprised that some aristocrat would come to visit them, and Lily confirmed that the director had given them this information. Lily also added that she will not hide the truth, and Rita should not place any hopes on this. She said that the heroine would stay here forever, because no one would want to take such a damned black-haired girl as a daughter. Such words, of course, as always, hurt the girl, but she tried to restrain her inner feelings and not show them outwardly. But nevertheless, the director's phrase about how no one would ever love her was constantly spinning in her head. Lily continued to mock. She told Rita not to worry because when she becomes a noblewoman, she will throw the poor girl a couple of coins. Of course, Rita didn't respond to Lily's barbs, but she thought that this was happening again. For the past few years, people have been coming to the shelter wanting to adopt a child, but each time she could only hide in the attic and watch, and it was all because of the black color of her hair. Everyone kept saying that a dark-haired woman in the shelter was bad luck, and once again she watched what was happening from the attic window and caught herself thinking that the black carriage from the novel was approaching the shelter. If he arrived on it, then it could be a character from the original story. The director greeted the young man and said that they had been waiting for him for a long time. He responded by introducing himself as Fern and adding that he had written to the director yesterday and that the Count was in the carriage. He could not say that in fact it was the Grand Duke. The director was very surprised when he heard the mention of the Count, but what would have been his surprise in reality if he had known the truth about this man? The man thought to himself that he smelled of money, and the director had a good feeling about him, and now he turned out to be a count. The director thought that this was his lucky day. Fern asked him if all the children were present, looking at the happy and laughing girls and boys, to which the director confidently replied that all the children from the orphanage were present. And then, a moment later, the Grand Duke emerged from the carriage and, in a rougher and more serious voice, asked if the director was telling him the truth. There was some fear on his face, but he continued to stand his ground and insisted that all the children were there, arguing that they could not deceive the Count. If that is so, then what kind of child is sitting in the attic? The Duke asked, looking at the director with his cold and angry eyes. At that moment their eyes met. Rita and the Duke looked at each other for a while. The girl was simply confused and did not have time to hide as she was supposed to. The director began to justify himself. He said that this girl had black hair and she was cursed. That's why he locked her in the attic. The Count asked this girl to come down to them, which greatly surprised the director. He began to worry because he did not know what could be assumed about his intentions. Because the director stood there for a while and thought, the Duke became angry and, approaching him, repeated his order again, adding a question about whether the director could even hear him. And then, a couple of minutes later, the girl came down and knocked on the office door. She said that it was Rita, although the man did not allow her to introduce herself by name. But this time they opened the door. As soon as the girl said her name, she also did not understand what was happening and was very worried. She realized that the person sitting in front of her was the same person she had seen from the attic window. Rita was very worried. She was sure that she would be scolded again. Fern immediately leaned closer and introduced himself, addressing Rita as a little lady. Confused, she again said that her name was Rita, to which the man replied that he was very pleased to meet her, and then asked how she usually spent her time there. She began to tell him that she usually helps with cleaning and cooking, and when she has free time, she goes up to the attic. Fern was noticeably surprised that the little girl cooks herself. But then the director intervened in the conversation, saying that it was very funny that a child who was not even 10 years old was preparing food himself. The Duke approached the heroine and asked the girl to go with him. He promised that she would no longer have to cook and live under someone's close supervision. He extended his hand to the girl, but the little girl could not believe that she would be allowed to do this. Of course, the Duke answered, and continued to look at Rita with hope and kindness in his eyes. To which the girl began to sadly say that she did not believe it, since she was not beautiful and had damned black hair, but the man replied that it did not matter at all. He added that for him, she was the most beautiful. The girl was surprised that a man would say such kind words to someone he was seeing for the first time. No one had ever said anything like that to her, even in her past life. It was enough to make her cry. He asked again if Rita would go with him, and the girl extended her hand to him in agreement. The director began to intervene in the conversation again. He stopped the count and asked again if he really wanted to take this girl. The Duke stood up and hugged Rita tightly, holding her close. He asked the director if there was any problem with this, to which he began to fawn and say that there were many other cute children in the orphanage, and it would be possible to look at someone else, adding again that this girl had damned black hair. The director did not understand why he chose Rita out of all the children. He was worried that if he took the girl who would cook and clean here, Fern interrupted his thoughts and asked why all the other children were wearing new clothes and only Rita was wearing old rags. The man was a little confused, but said that it was because of their financial problems and that they supposedly had no choice. Fern began to study some documents and read aloud what was written there: theft of parishioners' collections, the use of donations for personal expenses. Fern added that he understood why he was having financial difficulties at the shelter. The Duke asked Fern what the usual punishment was for such a thing, to which he replied that at the very least the director should be removed from office, all his assets confiscated and banished. The director shouted that the Count could not do this to him, especially because of that damn brat, meaning Rita. But the blade of the sword was already at the director's neck, and Fern advised him to watch his tongue, adding that he was still breathing only because there was a little lady in the room with them. The Duke ordered the director to be taken away. The little girl stood there in confusion. And now they were heading to the carriage. The Duke was carrying the baby in his arms, and in the distance the director's cries could be heard asking him to let go. The man asked Rita if she had anything she would like to take with her from the shelter, to which she replied that she didn't have any things here and she just wanted to leave. The Duke agreed and said that as soon as they arrived home, the girl would have everything she wanted. Rita was surprised to hear the word home and asked again. Such abrupt changes also scared her a little. Yes, home, the Duke answered her, and when he looked at the girl, his eyes shone with happiness. And finally that moment of calm came. The heart began to beat less quickly. They headed home in complete peace. They got into the carriage and began to drive towards the ducal estate. For a long time it was quiet inside. Everyone rode in silence. Rita was at a loss. She even began to think that this was all bad and should not have happened. She felt out of place. Sitting on the Duke's lap, she thought that she was ashamed. Such an inconspicuous girl to be next to such a man. She was too strongly instilled with the idea that she was nobody, and also cursed because of the color of her hair. And unfortunately, all she did now was cry non-stop, for which she was also very ashamed. Then thoughts began to come into her head that after some time, the Duke would decide to bring her back, how the children from the orphanage would treat her after that, probably even worse. But then the man took the hood of his cloak off his head, and Rita saw in front of her a man of pleasant appearance with beautiful eyes. But what was more surprising was that he also had black hair. She was so surprised that she couldn't help but ask if his black hair was real, to which the Duke replied in the affirmative. He began to tell Rita that he had a charming daughter, a child whom he had vowed to cherish and protect forever. But 7 years ago, he lost his daughter and wife in an accident. The wife died immediately, and the daughter was declared missing. Since then, the Duke has been looking for the black-haired girl, his daughter, everywhere. Only now Rita understood why he made such a decision about her adoption. But she said that she is not his daughter, unfortunately. The man knelt down in front of the little girl and asked her why she thought so, because he was sure of the opposite. The thing was that the director told the girl that she was the daughter of a servant, to which the man immediately said that this was out of the question and could not happen. After all, the girl has purple eyes, bright as violets, and black hair the same as the Duke, and he also feels the magic that surrounds Rita. He further added that the girl's name is not Rita, but Irita Krovachatz. And also his daughter, the daughter of Aslan Krovachatz, the only duchess in the Krovachatz family. He also added that earlier in the shelter he introduced himself as a count to hide his true status. Aslan Krovachatz, the founding hero of the Halcyon Empire, the man who earned the title of Grand Duke for his exploits, and the villain from the novel that little Isla read in her past life. And now this man is her father. The girl could not believe it. she thought that leaving the orphanage was already a blessing, but now she also has a real family. Arita could not even imagine how she could believe this, and also that among all people, her father was a villain. It seems that in such a situation she should not feel joy, but why were there tears of happiness in her eyes? She asked the Duke if she really had a family now. The Duke answered positively, and Arita thought that the tears were because she had a real family for the first time. They hugged, and the Duke asked his beloved daughter for forgiveness for the fact that her search took so long. And now, for some reason, the girl just wanted to cuddle up to him, to her father, but now they had already arrived at the palace. At the entrance, they were met by a butler who bowed respectfully, and Aslan immediately asked him about a room for Arita. The girl's room was ready, and the butler also assigned a reliable assistant for her. Since they were not planning to stay there for long, the butler did not particularly bother with the paperwork, to which the Duke replied that everything was fine and they would return to the estate very soon. The butler wished the Duke and the girl a pleasant rest, and left Aslan stood by the baby's bed for a long time and watched over her peace. He sat by her bed for a long time and tenderly held his daughter's hand. The rags that Arita was dressed in haunted him, as well as the way she spoke calmly about the work that was dumped on her shoulders. The man thought about all this and thought that, in fact, even tearing them all to pieces would not be enough punishment. Some time later, a young man approached the Duke and said that Fern had been taken to the basement. The man was surprised that it happened so quickly, but the aide added that both personal issues and those concerning documents had been resolved. The Duke thanked the boy and they went to the basement together. Upon entering, the Duke immediately called out to Fern, who slowly looked around and noted that they had arrived quite quickly. After his bow of greeting, the Duke asked if they had already begun what was needed. Fern replied that he hadn't yet, and behind him sat a man with a rope bag wrapped around his head. Fern added that it looked very funny, because he hadn't been touched yet, but he was already shaking. While he was treating the little girl so rudely, the Duke asked him why he was shaking so much, since they hadn't done anything to him yet. A voice came from the bag, asking who these people were and what they wanted to do with him. Fern immediately answered him to watch his words, because someone like him is not worthy of even seeing the Duke's face. Aslan agreed and added that it was true, because the director was absolutely nothing special. So much so that it was hard for him to refrain from cutting off the director's head right then and there. He already had a sword in his hands, and the director screamed in fear. But Aslan only cut the ropes that were wrapped around his neck, and the bag fell to the ground. The Duke began the conversation with a question 7 years ago. The director brought a 2-year-old baby to the orphanage. Her name was Rita. Does the director remember who gave her away? But he could not answer anything. He only noticed the red eyes of the men and realized that he was that same count. Then the director noticed the color of the Duke's hair and assumed that he was probably the father of the black-haired girl. He began to beg for mercy, but the Duke did not need his empty apologies. An apology made under threat of death has absolutely no meaning. Aslan immediately put the blade of his sword to the orphanage director's neck and asked what the point of his empty apologies was, to which he began to say with a trembling voice that he really wanted to apologize to Rita. The Duke grabbed the man by the face and asked again. He ordered him not to utter his daughter's name with his filthy mouth. Fern began to feel the magical power and began to worry that Aslan might cross the border. He called out to him in an attempt to stop him. The Duke's hand was already reaching out to the director, and he asked if he was still not ready to talk. The man fell to his knees and said that he was ready and would tell everything. It was winter 7 years ago when this girl was brought to the shelter. But then he somehow hesitated, as if he didn't want to speak. The Duke looked at him coldly and waited for him to continue. Meanwhile, Rita was sleeping in her room, but this time too her sleep was restless. She dreamed that she was alone again. There was absolutely nothing around, only emptiness and darkness. How pitiful it was to look at this, the little girl thought. She began to hear voices that kept telling her, how could she be as useless as you? You were gloomy, insignificant. That's why you were abandoned. She started crying and screaming, covering her ears with her hands, closing her eyes. The girl asked not to talk like that. But in the distance she began to hear the voice of the Duke, who called her by name. Irida, my daughter. The girl heard from all sides, and the space gradually began to acquire colors. This voice seemed to lead her out of that darkness and gloom. Suddenly she opened her eyes and saw her father in front of her. She addressed him as Sir, but from the man's reaction it was clear that he didn't quite like it. The Duke frowned, and the girl immediately realized that she had said something wrong. So she immediately corrected herself and, smiling, looking into his eyes, said, "Dad." Her eyes were shining, and her cheeks were red from embarrassment. "Yes, it's me." The father also answered her with a smile. He was glad that the girl was now next to him and that she had finally woken up and rested. By the time Arita left the room, the table was already set. The Duke did not know what she would like, so he asked to prepare many different dishes. He said that she did not have to eat everything. She could just take whatever she wanted. "That's too much," the little girl replied. Her eyes filled with surprise, since she had previously been forbidden to take large portions in the cafeteria. Arita didn't usually eat that much, but the Duke said that today was her first day here, so he wanted to make it a memorable day for his daughter. He also added that the servants would eat too, so she shouldn't worry. Arita looked at him with her huge eyes and thought that in the novel he was a villain, but now he didn't look like one at all. Now he looks like a father trying his best to please his daughter. The girl gently pulled him by the sleeve of his shirt to get his attention, as he was a little distracted by checking if all the dishes were in place. She turned to him, Dad, and asked him to eat with her. The man smiled. He did not expect such a request and answered positively. And so they sat down at a huge table next to each other and began to eat. When the dinner was over, the Duke handed the girl dessert, while he sweetly called his daughter my lady. She just stared at the plate of dessert in front of her for a while, since they weren't even allowed to try anything like that at the shelter. The Duke hoped that Arita would like this treat because all children love sweets. He said he just loves seeing the smile on his daughter's face and that everything here is hers, so she can always take what she wants. In her past life, she rarely got to eat cake, and now she decided to try a small piece. And in this life, this is not the first time, and she realized that she likes sweets so much. When the heroine ate something tasty, she felt that her life could be as sweet as this treat. After the very first piece, the heroine exclaimed happily that this cake was very tasty. And the Duke looked at her with a smile and then gently wiped her cheek with his hand, since the little girl was so carried away by eating dessert that she did not notice how she got dirty with cream. The Duke noted that the girl reminded him very much of Sarabia. She also loved sweets very much. The girl's eyes widened, wondering who her father meant. Serbia Crovahearts is the second daughter of Marquis Vicente, Aslan's wife and Arita's mother, the only woman who fell in love with the rude and cruel Duke. He began to tell the girl that Serbia was her mother. She loved sweets so much that she even sometimes woke up at night to eat them. Arita listened attentively to all the words. She found herself thinking that she felt strange, perhaps because this was the first time she had ever said the word mom. The little girl was very interested and began to ask her father about what her mother was like, to which he replied that she was very kind and caring. He added that, unlike him, Serbia knew how to share its concern with others. She was also incredibly beautiful and charming. She never hesitated to give her love. Everyone adored her. And even now, the Duke remembers as if it were real, her gentle and radiant smile, which always made him feel so good and calm. Only after seeing the expression on her father's face did the girl understand what kind of person Serbia was. The emotions that her father demonstrated were simply impossible to fake. He was speaking just as sincerely now. The way he squinted his eyes kindly, the way he talked about her smile, she must have been beautiful, Arita began to think. Just as her father had said, Serbia apparently truly loved her daughter. Evening came and Aslan took his daughter to his room. He wished her sweet dreams and told her to call him immediately if she needed anything. The girl smiled happily. She was pleased that they were taking such good care of her. She also wished her father good night and went to bed. But she couldn't fall asleep right away. She wanted to enjoy every minute spent here. So many different changes had happened in the last day. She even learned for the first time what a hot bath was. For the first time, she felt what it was like to sleep on a soft bed and not on the cold attic floor. She also thought about her father, Aslan the blood drinker. Unlike the novella in which he smells of blood, in reality he only has a pleasant smell. She wondered if something had happened that had changed him forever. Also, in the original story, there is another villain. Upon arriving at the duchy, she was supposed to meet her older brother. His name is Aylan, Arita's father told her. You may not remember him, but he was very interested in you. And now she even knows his name. Aylan Crovahearts. In the original story, he was the villain who died along with Aslan. And now the girl has taken over the body of the youngest daughter of this family. Arita continued to just lie there. She even looked at her hands to see if this was really not a dream. She thought that she was just a side character who didn't even appear in the novel, but it seems that she really is the lost daughter of the Crovaharts family. It sounds like something out of a soap opera, the little girl thought. A year ago, after she found herself in Arita's body, the girl felt so bad that she couldn't even walk. The worker locked her in a warehouse and the baby survived on bread and water alone. She only stayed alive because she had memories from her past life, but in the original story, Arita would have died. Perhaps the poet's father in that story became the villain. The little girl clenched her fists and began to convince herself that she had never been abandoned and that she had always been the favorite child in the family. She didn't know how she ended up being the hero of this story, but one thing is clear: her existence influenced the original plot. In this case, the girl made a firm decision that it was worth changing the plot even more. She wanted to make sure that her father and brother would find happiness in the future. The next morning, the maid exclaimed at how beautiful the little lady looked in her new dress. This dress really fit the little one perfectly, and the color matched the color of her eyes very nicely. The maid handed Arita another dress. She said that in her opinion this color would also look good. The girl happily replied that she would try it on soon too. But the maid did not stop offering different options. She wanted the little girl to try on all the most beautiful and expensive things. Arita even felt dizzy from such pressure, and she asked Mary to stop. The girl's father entered the room. He looked simply amazing. This green suit, embroidered with expensive stones, perfectly matched the black color of his hair. The girl immediately apologized to him for keeping him waiting. The Duke took the girl in his arms and kindly reminded her that he had asked her not to run here, as it was dangerous, but the girl only wanted to be next to him as quickly as possible. The man agreed and suggested they go. It seemed like the awkwardness between them was starting to fade, maybe because they had spent too much time together over the past few days. The Duke looked closely at the girl and asked her what she was thinking about. She made kitten eyes and said that she would be interested to know something. Arita asked when they could go to the estate. The Duke replied that he did not know the exact date and continued to drink tea intelligently, then added that they would go there whenever Arita wanted. This answer surprised the heroine a little, and at the same time made her happy that now she had the right to choose, and they were consulting with her. The Duke stood up and began to approach the girl. He said that even if she said that she wanted to go there today, then so it would be. To which the little girl replied that she would like to do it today. The Duke knelt down in front of her and asked if she was sure, since the duchy would be a completely new place for her. But she replied that everything was fine and she wouldn't worry anymore. And then she asked her father if he would be with her. "Of course," Aslan replied, "I will always be on your side," and both of their faces were covered in contented and kind smiles. But Arita asked them to stop by somewhere before leaving. She wanted to visit the merchants from whom she bought products at the market at that time. They were the only people who treated her well and always treated her to some delicious things. The woman said that she had heard the news that Arita had been adopted, but she was worried that something might go wrong. But the girl reassured her and said that everything was fine now, and also promised to visit them again a little later. But the woman was simply sincerely glad that everything was fine with Arita and that she was healthy, and she also asked how the girl was enjoying her new home and whether she liked it there. As they walked to the grocery store, the girl happily began to tell her father about these people. Uncle Philip and Aunt Megan were very kind to her, and they were not interested in her black hair. That's why the heroine wanted to say goodbye to them before they set off on their journey. The Duke realized that they were truly good people, in which case he supported his daughter and said that saying goodbye to them was the right decision. Philip and Megan wished the baby to remain as strong as she is and for everything to be well. When the girl finished saying goodbye, the man picked her up and suggested that they go. She smiled because she felt the warmth of her father's embrace, which had already become like family to her. The first year when the girl found herself in this body was really very difficult for her, but now she can finally be happy, at least a little. The Duke took his daughter by the hand and asked if she was ready, adding that they were leaving from the backyard. Arita wondered how long the journey would take. It seemed like the Grand Duchy was quite far from the capital. The man calmly asked the girl not to worry about the road. He added that Arita would go there with someone she already knew well. She was supposed to go with Fern, who was already waiting for them in the backyard. Coming closer, Fern said that everything was ready. It was difficult to prepare in such a short time, but he managed, to which Aslan replied that this is why he is his right hand. The girl began to hide behind her father. She was a little shy, but Fern, smiling, extended his hand to her and called her "my lady." Kneeling down in front of the heroine, he said that he could finally introduce himself. He said that his name was Fern Eilish, and he was the Grand Duke's chief assistant. The girl began to worry about him kneeling in front of her, and it being quite dirty here, to which he replied that this was an official performance, so it had to comply with the rules. He also noted that the little lady was very kind. When the man stood up, he told the girl that it was time for them to hit the road. The little girl asked where the carriage was, and the men looked at each other. The Duke extended his hands to the girl and said that he had forgotten to explain something. The thing is that they move using teleportation magic. If they went by carriage, it would take a whole month. Erita was surprised that it was possible to travel such distances using magic, to which the Duke replied that it was impossible for an ordinary magician. For Fern, however, it was quite possible, but only with a little help. It was necessary to put on a necklace that enhances magical power. He warned the girl that she might feel a little dizzy, but she should still keep her eyes closed. The Duke added that if she was scared, she should just squeeze his hand and he would always be by her side. Fern began to cast a spell in an unknown language, and the space plunged into some kind of whirlpool of blue energy. There was no choice, and it was necessary to close my eyes. And so they arrived. Fern understood that the baby might be a little surprised, especially since she felt the magic of teleportation for the first time. It was incredible they arrived so quickly. "Welcome home, Erita," said her father. When they entered the estate, the maids were already standing at the threshold, bowing their heads respectfully to greet the Duke and his daughter. The little girl was very worried, because there were so many people around and everyone treated her completely differently than they did in the orphanage or in her past life. She could not believe that all this was happening to her in the real world. She told her father that she felt very excited because so many people were greeting her. Aslan asked the maids to return to their places, as the child was feeling uncomfortable, and the women immediately began to carry out the Duke's instructions. Suddenly, the girl heard a familiar male voice, which addressed her with trepidation. "My lady, we meet again." "Welcome home," said the butler, and bowed. The girl thought about this man for a while. And then she screamed. The butler, she saw him in another mansion just recently, but surprisingly, he arrived here first. He replied that a servant should never arrive later than the master. Mary was also already there and had managed to clean up Erita's room. Aslan asked the butler if everything was ready, to which he replied positively and offered to immediately lead them to the room. The father asked the girl if she wanted to see the room, but in general, they could go wherever she wanted. The little girl's eyes lit up. She couldn't wait to see her new room. They arrived at the place, and the Duke opened the door and said, "Come in, this is your old room." The girl stood in place for a while and looked at everything carefully. She was surprised and delighted at the same time. This room resembled the chambers of a princess from the books she once read. Erita decided to look around in more detail and began to examine the toys that were in the room. The girl was surprised that there was not a single speck of dust anywhere. She also felt that all the people around her were waiting for her arrival and preparing, and all their emotions were very sincere and not feigned. The Duke watched everything from the side, but suddenly he noticed that the smile had disappeared from his daughter's face. This alarmed him greatly, because he tried to do everything at the highest level. He asked the girl what happened. The Duke assumed that she didn't like the room, and then he offered to choose a friend if she wanted. Erita smiled and replied that it was not that at all. She was just very happy to be back home, and she really liked this room. She thanked her father for that. Aslan was glad to hear such words, but still reminded her that if she wanted to change the room, she should just say so. A moment later, their conversation was interrupted by an unfamiliar voice that said the word "Dad." Opposite the Duke and Erita stood a young man who introduced himself as Elan. He was the heir to the ducal family and the older brother of Erita. This boy was incredibly similar to his father, the same hair, the same bright red eyes. He came closer to the girl to get acquainted, and for a moment they froze in front of each other. Erita heard that he was 5 years older than her. The heroine continued to look at her brother with wide open eyes. Meanwhile, the guy was also standing opposite, staring at Erita. Suddenly, the little girl grabbed her heart. She felt something strange inside, but she didn't understand what exactly. It was a bit like the magic she felt on the way here during teleportation. The girl couldn't breathe. Some kind of aura was emanating from Elan, but she couldn't understand why he was using magic now. But suddenly, a heavy hand fell on Erita's shoulder. It was his father's hand. He turned to Elan and asked him to control his emotions, as his powers were overflowing and affecting Erita. Now the girl could breathe again. She began to understand how to control her powers, and Ailan meanwhile apologized to his sister. He then apologized again and asked if he could come closer to her for just a second. The girl had not yet had time to answer, but he had already taken a step towards her and was standing very close to her. He looked at her for a long time and simply remained silent. Then he touched Arita's long, beautiful hair and said his name. He seemed surprised that after so many years he was seeing his own sister in person. He gently hugged the heroine and thanked her for coming back, and also promised to never leave her alone again. Tears began to fall from Ailan's eyes. It was clear that his brother was happy to see the family reunited after such a long time, but this was too much. After that, the little girl decided to go and distract herself with the toys and dolls that were in her room. But Aslan and Ailan continued to stand and be touched by the fact that the little girl was playing. She wondered how long they were going to stand like this and watch her. But after some time, she was approached. The father said that they were leaving so that Arita could rest. He offered her to change into more comfortable clothes and said that she could do whatever she wanted, which the girl was very happy about. After which Aslan began a conversation with his son. He said that he spent many years searching for Arita, but as it turned out, her disappearance was not accidental, so now they need to keep the fact that they found her a secret. Ailan decided to clarify whether his father meant that there were people who needed Arita and received a positive answer. He then asked if his father had any idea who could have done this, to which he also replied in the affirmative. They had not yet found any definitive evidence, but the only ones who could be responsible for this were the imperial family or the Empress's faction. Since Queen Asila was a longtime friend of their mother, the Empress's faction is under suspicion. Yes, the main suspects behind the disappearance are the Empress, her family, and the Duchy of Lenosin. And suddenly something comes into the Duke's head, a tattoo. The man who gave the child away had a tattoo on the back of his hand. It was a round tattoo in the shape of a flower. This design resembles the emblem of the Duchy of Lenosin, but there is still no exact evidence. But just sitting on your hands would not be the best option either. The Duke agreed and said that they could not allow this to happen. In that case, it is worth thinking about a plan of further action and exposing everyone involved in Arita's disappearance. A professional hunter always leaves a trap before starting the hunt. This is what the Duke suggested. He wanted to leave a trap for them. And when they catch the criminal, even if it is the Empress, she will definitely not be able to get out. The villain in the original novel is the rude and cruel Duke of Crowahearts, but Arita's brother and father only smiled tenderly at her. "I will never leave you alone again," her brother told her. "Thank you for coming home," her father told her. Perhaps bringing back the family they lost would bring them great joy. But every time Arita sees their genuine smiles, she feels uneasy, as if she is deceiving them. The girl lay in her room and thought about all this, hugging her new toy. The Arita that the Duke and Ailan fell in love with is not her. The girl often thought that maybe her father had simply made a mistake and that she was not their real daughter, and she also considered herself to be the wrong one because she remembered her past life. She wondered if Ailan and Aslan would find out about this. Would they be happy that at least Arita's appearance had returned? Or they will be upset that it is actually someone else in the guise of their daughter and sister? She really hoped they would think it was just fate. Arita knew it was selfish, but she didn't want to be alone anymore. The next day, Arita began to think that Mary was a little scary to her. How much desire does it take to try on 5 different costumes for the heroine every day, and each time braid her hair so that it matches the outfit? She even managed to escape with difficulty, saying that her father was waiting for her. As an excuse, Arita carefully knocked on the Duke's room. Her older brother opened the door, and as always, he smiled broadly. He was glad to see his daughter every time. He offered to come in and added that he was already getting bored. The girl thought that he was somehow saying such things too simply. They approached their father together, but something surprised Arita and she stopped. Aslan sat in front of her and held some piece of paper in his hands. Arita exhaled and thought, "It's good that he's here and not just her brother." The father sat the girl on his lap and asked if she had finished examining the room. She replied with a smile that she liked everything very much. Then she thought that without thinking twice she had rushed sharply to her father and only now thought that Ailan might not like it. Perhaps he would be jealous. Ailan seemed to understand and gestured to his sister not to worry, and his father noted that he hadn't seen his son smile like that in a long time. He asked Ailan if he really loved his sister, to which he received a confident affirmative answer. She was truly charming. Both her father and her brother often spoke about it. Everyone was delighted with the little girl. But then Ailan suggested that his father stop, as he noticed that his behavior was embarrassing Irita, and besides, they wanted to talk about something important. This began to worry the girl, because she could not imagine what important thing they wanted to talk to her about, and the Duke explained that for now he would like to keep the baby's return home a secret. Irita fell silent. She didn't know what to answer, and moreover, she didn't understand for what purpose and whether it was bad. But then Aslan added that in order to prevent possible danger, he asked his daughter to stay in the mansion for now, even if it would be somewhat inconvenient. She agreed with a smile, but in her mind she wondered if he even took her opinion into account on this matter. He made this decision for safety reasons, and after the conversation he thanked his daughter for her understanding. The Duke then suggested that they take a look at the mansion, but suddenly Fern entered the room. He held a huge stack of some papers in his hands, and opening the door with a sharp movement, he joyfully greeted the Duke. As he approached Crovaharts with the documents, he also noticed that the young lady and the gentleman were also there. The Duke did not immediately understand what Fern had brought him, to which he replied that these were all the documents that had accumulated during his absence, and he had sorted out those that would need to be filled out today. Aslan, a little confused, asked his daughter for forgiveness for not being able to show her the mansion. Fern also apologized to her, but the little girl replied that everything was fine. She also added that she might go see the mansion with her brother. Ailan was only happy with such words and said that he would be happy to show everything to Irita, and Fern wanted to join them. She gently extended her hand to her brother so as not to get lost, and he asked if she was upset that her father wouldn't be able to go for a walk with them today. "Of course not," Irita answered with a smile as always. They left, and Fern replied that the young master seemed to be in a great mood today, referring to the Duke's son. He also noticed that he began to smile much more often. He had only seen Ailan smile in front of Serbia, and now in front of Irita. That is why the Duke cannot forgive the one who took away the smile of his son and his daughter. Fern added that he has new information on this matter. The Empress's informant visited the orphanage, pretending to be a family member and coming to identify the director's body. The main question was whether there was any information left about Irita in the orphanage. According to the documents, the girl was adopted by a foreign nobleman. The Empress won't be able to find her even if she tries. This bunch of nobles will disappear into the sea along with the sinking ship on the way to their homeland. "Okay, what about that man?" asked the Duke, to which Fern replied that Kyle was on their tail and could catch them at any moment. They hid well for 7 years, Duke Crowaharts noted. He asked Kyle to drag that man here without harming a hair on his head. He wanted him to fully experience what the true wrath of Duke Aslan Bloodheart was like. Ailan and Irita were walking around the mansion, and the girl suddenly stopped at a large window. She was delighted with what she saw. It was the first time she had seen such a beautiful garden. She stood as if enchanted and simply admired this place. "When you were little, you really liked it here," Ailan said, and such words caused surprise on the girl's face. Then the brother began to tell the story of this garden. It turns out that the Duke made it especially for their mother. Serbia always wanted her own garden, but she had a hard time taking care of the plants, so Aslan did it for her. Now Irita remembered that the garden really was in the original story. The place where Aslan first showed his weaknesses just before his death. She now realized that it was the Garden of Serbia. Irita decided to push these thoughts away and not think about the bad events of the original story that hadn't even happened yet, when suddenly her brother called her name. He asked his sister if she wanted to go for a walk. Of course, the girl was only happy with such an offer. They approached the fountain, which also surprised the little girl. She even exclaimed, "What a huge fountain!" Then her attention quickly turned to the equally beautiful flowers that were everywhere there. She loved absolutely everything about this place. But because they walked too much, the heroine's legs began to hurt, and she told Ailan about it. But then she hesitated and said that she was joking. Her brother asked her to answer honestly, but the girl's face looked embarrassed, and for some reason she apologized. She didn't want to tell him about it because she didn't want Ailan to continue treating her like cotton candy. The guy laughed and asked if she didn't like that they treated her this way. Irita denied it and added that she just didn't like that her brother treated her like she was helpless. He added, like helpless cotton candy, and began to laugh even harder. He asked for forgiveness, but he found it very funny. However, he asked the girl not to force herself to go and suggested that they rest under a tree. But something caught Aylan's attention, and he asked Erita to wait. They sat down under a tree, and the girl wondered how long it would take her to get used to this kind of treatment. She began to think that maybe even her whole life would not be enough to get used to this, but her brother asked her to look up. Something surprised him. "The light passing through the leaves resembles stars," he said. And then he added, "as bright and beautiful as my little sister and warm, gentle as sunlight." If Aylan found out who Erita really was, would he continue to be so kind to her, the heroine wondered. If that warmth disappeared, would she be able to find out? She hung her head sadly and drew her knees up, then asked if he really thought of her as a little sister. "Of course," Aylan answered. But she immediately asked the next question, "What if you were wrong? What if she is just another girl with black hair and purple eyes?" The heroine was very worried about these questions, and now she was finally able to say them out loud. She even began to hope that he would now say that he knew that she was not Erita. Life in the shelter, loneliness, all this could be endured. The girl began to speak further. She continued to hope that he would now say that he had realized this a long time ago, that he did not need her. Suddenly, her brother just hugged her tightly so that she wouldn't worry. He wanted to calm his sister down and let her know that he and her father really love her and are afraid of losing her. He added that if she was afraid, she should just trust him and her father. "We are not mistaken," Aylan added, continuing to hug his sister. "The one we love and the one we have recognized as Erita is the real Erita," Aylan added. He promised that they would never be separated again. Even though her brother said that she was the real Erita and that he and her father were not mistaken, the girl's soul was still heavy. Because, to be honest, she was still a stranger to this body. She felt that way and didn't even know why she was here. And standing on the balcony of the mansion, she thought that perhaps it was worth going to the palace to find out more about this. But even if that is the case, the love between Aylan and his father will not change. The girl thought for a long time and convinced herself to be strong. The people who love her, the people she loves, are changing their terrible future. She came to the decision that this was all she needed to focus on for now. A few days later, the Duke and his son are standing in the corridor. Aslan asks him if this is true, and he replies that it is. Aylan says it still breaks his heart to remember how Erita cried. The Duke couldn't believe it happened. Erita should have accepted the love of her family without hesitation, but she feels like this love does not belong to her, and even worse, she is afraid of being abandoned. Her father asked Aylan, if this happens again, to calm Erita down. Their conversation was interrupted by Fern, who appeared as suddenly as always. He reported that Kyle had successfully captured that man. He should arrive tomorrow at noon. Now the Duke could officially announce the return of Erita. The one who left the girl in the shelter apparently thought he was saving her. What nonsense! The Duke was indignant. Fern asked if he should inform Master Aylan, but Aslan replied that he would do it himself, since all that was on his son's mind right now was how to spend more time with Erita. And all that matters now is her well-being. Official announcement of the return of Erita Crowahearts, daughter of Aslan Crowahearts and Grand Duchess Crowahearts. The glass flies to the floor with screams after seeing the news. The red-haired girl is furious. She screams that this pathetic girl should have died at sea, while the maid tries to calm the girl down. "I was sure that she was dead," she continued to scream, and crumpled the piece of paper on which the official announcement was written. 7 years ago, without having confirmed the heroine's death with her own eyes, the girl never thought that all this would come back and haunt her. "One more year, and everything will be ready," she said. She began to reassure herself that everything would be fine. After all, she had ordered this to be dealt with. No matter how strong Crowahearts was, they would never be able to know the truth after 7 years. The girl decided that she urgently needed to end this before Crowahearts got to the bottom of the truth. A year later, a blonde woman is lying on the bed. It is the Empress. Her health is very bad. Her son sits next to her and holds her hand, begging her not to die and not to leave him. It's been a year since the announcement of Erita's return, causing a stir in the capital. The girl didn't even know about it, since she didn't leave the mansion. Meanwhile, a lot had changed. She became closer to the people in the mansion and to her family. The heroine also began to take magic lessons from Fern. As Fern says, the girl is amazingly talented in magic, while her father looks significantly worried about this. But the heroine thinks that it will be useful for her. It means that she will now have another weapon for the future. Moreover, Fern turned out to be a very good teacher. Despite his slightly Spartan style, he really knows how to emphasize the key things. If he had been born in Korea, he would most likely have become a famous teacher, Erita thought. Thanks to this, learning is very fun. Who would have thought that studying would be a pleasure for the heroine? But the heroine's thoughts were interrupted by the maid, who said that she had been looking for her everywhere. Mary said that the master had asked to call her, and it seemed that he had some urgent matter, but Erita thought that they had breakfast together just a couple of hours ago. She had a bad feeling. The girl tried to come as quickly as possible. She saw her father, whose expression definitely did not please her. Erita had never seen her father with such a gloomy expression before, and she asked what the Duke wanted to tell her. Aslan informed that he would need to visit the palace. The fact was that the Empress had died, Azila Villarida of the Marquisate of Valeria, Empress and mother of the 23rd Emperor Gamrian. Erita immediately remembered that the Empress was a character who did not die in the original story. She helped Kallion become emperor and introduced him to the main female character. The fact that she is dead means that the future will be changed. The heroine immediately began to think that the possible reason for these changes was her existence. In the original story, Aslan did not find his daughter. The Duke interrupted her thoughts and asked if everything was okay, and also said that if she did not want to, she did not have to go and could stay in the mansion. But the little girl looked at him with her bright eyes and said that everything was okay, and she would go with him. She felt she had to go in person. The girl felt she needed to see it with her own eyes. The Duke said that tomorrow he needs to stop by the mansion in the capital and then he will head to the palace. Erita decided to see what was written in the original story. The original novella is not that difficult, she began to study. This is a healing story that centers on Baron's daughter, Ayla, who has been surrounded by the love of her kind parents since childhood and her romance with the second prince, Kallion. From the middle of the novel, the story follows Aslan, who sided with the first prince and fought against Kallion, eventually going berserk, and soon after, Aylan decides to end his life. This is the role of her family. Now it seems to Erita that it is such a simple and predictable novella, and it is strange that she liked it so much then. She found it by chance in a bookstore when she was going to buy a notebook, taking with her money from her part-time job. And in the end, she bought this book, as if under some kind of spell. But the story from the original novel goes completely differently. Erita felt cheated in this situation. The only suspect in the murder of the Empress is the Queen, the same red-haired girl. The Empress could only be killed by the one who is the mother of the second prince. That is the Queen. The main male character, Kallion, is now 11 years old, and Erita will see him tomorrow. It was strange for the girl to think that she was heading to the palace where the plot of the novel unfolds, but the heroine thought it was a good opportunity. She spent a year trying to solve the mysteries in the plot, but there were some things she still couldn't understand, especially the question of how the first prince managed to win his father over to his side. In the original, it was clear that the father fought with the first prince's side and went mad, but the girl understood that the Duke would not do such things only for his own benefit. If this was a struggle for power, then it must definitely be connected with the Queen. It is possible that this death was just the beginning, but now it is still worth waiting until tomorrow, because there are still 9 years before the beginning of the original story, and the only thing that happened during this time was the funeral ceremonies in the palace. But at least the heroine will be able to see the face of the one who is behind all this, and here comes the next day. Erita noticed something on her father's hand and asked what it was. He replied that it was a bracelet with a signal stone inside. He gave it to Erita and asked her to carry it with her. If she passed it on, the bracelet would give a signal. "It seems you were up late again yesterday," the Duke noted, adding that if anything happened he would come running immediately and asked not to worry. They agreed that they would go inside together. This is a temple of the sun god. As expected from the state religion of the empire, everything was decorated very elegantly. It is announced that Queen Aisha Renosan and the first prince of Thesis Ruin Elver are already here. Here they are. The heroine froze in anticipation of their approach. The way they wipe away their tears gives them the appearance of deep sadness. Erita thought that no one would believe that the relationship between the Empress and the Queen was bad. They came in, which means that Kallion Ruin Elver will appear very soon. And so the second prince arrived. He did not inherit the golden hair, the symbol of the royal family. He was the main character, the story that Erita liked in her past life. The priest began to read a prayer. There was silence all around. And the one who lost his family due to the change in history suffered the most. But Irita noticed that he was pretending that everything was fine. He was clenching his fists so hard that his hands turned pale. No matter that he is a prince, it must be hard to remain calm after his mother's death. They say that the Empress died right before Kalyan's eyes. It's hard to imagine the shock he experienced. Irita thought about what if he lost the only person who understood him because of her. After all, the only thing that differs from the original novel is Irita herself. If history changed because of her, she would need to make sure no one got hurt. This point of loneliness, the heroine understood it better than anyone. The heroine thought that they would return home immediately after the funeral. But the Duke asked Aylan to look after his sister, and he himself said that he would return soon. Aslan went to meet the Emperor, and the girl simply decided to wander around the court garden, but he was partially forced. She noticed that even the fountain was decorated with jewels. Aylan noticed the heroine's thoughtfulness and asked what she was thinking about. Suddenly, she asked an unexpected question. "How much will I get if I sell this fountain?" Aylan noted that she sometimes expresses very strange thoughts. The girl asked not to mock, but he continued this topic and said that if she liked this fountain, then they could buy the same one for their garden. But a man was already approaching them with a quick step, who called out to the young Duke. He asked what happened, and the man said that he had something important to tell him. Aylan asked his sister to wait for him in the palace, to which she replied that she would just continue walking in the garden. Everything was fine. He was a little worried and asked again if it was okay if she was alone, but the girl repeated that everything was fine, reminding her that she had a bracelet that her father had given her. Aylan reminded her once again that if something happened, she should immediately call him and he would come running, and with that, they said goodbye. The heroine decided that she wanted to practice magic, and after moving away some distance, decided that this place was perfect. She began to cast some spells and remembered the exercises Fern had told her about in class. The efforts were clearly paying off. It had become much easier for Irita to control magic. Now it was time to take the next step. But suddenly she had to stop. She noticed that Kalyan was next to her, but what was he doing here? For a while, they just stood and looked at each other. The boy apparently didn't expect to see anyone here either. Irita was confused and didn't understand what to do. Maybe she should say hello, she thought. And when she opened her mouth to say hello, the boy put his finger to his lips, indicating that she should say nothing and be quiet. In the distance, the heroine heard voices that were clearly looking for the prince. She assumed that he wanted to hide from everyone, but accidentally stumbled upon her. Kalyan apologized and asked to be quieter. But suddenly the guys heard steps approaching them. Apparently people heard that they were talking here. The voice continued to repeat questioningly, "Your Highness, are you here?" But the boys sat silently. Irita decided that there was no choice and that Kalyan needed help. She hid them with the help of magic, and in an instant they seemed to evaporate into thin air. They continued to remain silent, despite the fact that they were not visible, and the man who was looking for the boy thought that he imagined it. He began to leave. The guys sat in silence for a while, just in case, so as not to attract unnecessary attention to themselves. Irita explained that they had to hurry, which is why they were too close under the dome. Kalyan began to speak in a whisper, but Irita said that he could speak as usual. No one would see or hear them. Her father and Fern told Irita not to use magic outside the home, but this time was an exception. She just didn't want Kalyan to get hurt because of her again. They looked around to make sure there was no one nearby. The boy thanked the heroine. He said that thanks to her he was not caught, and added that he did not know that the young lady could do magic. He offered the girl his help. Irita extended her hand to him and asked him not to tell anyone that she had used magic. He already understood that the heroine could get into trouble if someone found out, so he promised to keep quiet. The heroine froze for a moment, looking at him, his silver hair, each hair sparkling in the moonlight. But suddenly he said that it looked like someone was looking for the girl. Indeed, in the distance, voices were heard shouting the heroine's name. They were about to leave, but Irita suddenly stopped Kalyan and handed him her bracelet, which she had made herself. She didn't know yet if it was superstition, but this bracelet brought good luck to Irita. The boy took it in his hands and grinned a little. She wished the prince to stay away from trouble, because he had no one else on his side. The girl with black hair, the young Lady Crovahearts, Kalyan heard that she lived for a long time without even knowing that she had a family. Despite all the trials she has gone through, she still smiles like that. He also wished Irita to be happy and smiled, holding her lucky bracelet in his hand. Having reached the house, she went out onto the balcony and sighed heavily. She thought about everything that had happened recently. The funeral of the Empress is something that did not happen in the original story. And now Erita accidentally stumbled upon the main male character in the garden. She put her head in her hands and thought that today was more like some kind of chaos. The whole day was out of the framework of the original novel. She remembered her words that she said to the boy as she said goodbye, "You need to find your happiness, your highness." This was the icing on the cake. How could she blurt out something like that? The heroine was worried that he probably thought she was talking some kind of nonsense. In the original story, Caelion was an enemy of her family. He was responsible for the death of Erita's father and brother, but now everything has changed. Perhaps she will even be able to lure Caelion to her side. If Erita succeeds, she will be able to change the fate of her family and save the lives of her father and brother. But suddenly, the girl began to feel ill. She felt very dizzy, and everything around her went dark. Some voices began to be heard in her head, which insisted that the Grand Duke was not who he seemed, and Erita grabbed her head from such surprise. There must be a reason why the Duke sided with my brother. Maybe it was magic. Maybe it was a curse, the voice in her head continued to say. Erita couldn't stand it anymore. It was the first time she had encountered something like this, so out of fear and lack of strength she fell to the floor and waited for it all to end. She couldn't understand why these visions and this silver hair that she accidentally saw in front of her suddenly appeared. She realized that it was definitely Caelion. Perhaps Erita simply saw something from the untold past of the original story. Caelion in her vision spoke as if he knew her father very well, as a man loyal to those he trusted. The heroine began to think that maybe her father supported Caelion at first, and then for some reason went over to the side of the first prince. Perhaps the first prince and empress had put some pressure on him, and now when Erita thought about it, she began to hear the word curse. Maybe the father will be cursed, but ordinary magic does not work on him. Since he is a master of the sword, the girl did not know why she had such a vision, but it is definitely worth thinking about. She decided that the only person she could ask about the curse was Fern, so she went to him at the crack of dawn, and the man, as always, greeted the girl with a smile. He already thought that something had happened if Erita wanted to see him so early. Fern asked why Erita had suddenly become interested in curses. The girl simply smiled. She couldn't think of what to answer him. She herself realized that running to him at dawn and starting asking questions really looked suspicious. She had to come up with an excuse quickly. She said that she just wanted to know about potential dangers, but the man asked the young lady not to worry, since if anything happened, he would always be there. But Erita stood her ground and repeated the question of what he knew about curses, especially those that could work on a swordmaster. Fern was a little embarrassed to hear such a question, and then asked if His Majesty had done anything to offend the girl. 8 years later, regarding that question, it is very difficult to curse a swordmaster. In fact, curses are closer to folklore than to real magic. If Erita is looking for a spell strong enough to curse the swordmaster, then it would be better to use black magic. Erita wrote down all the information related to this in her notebook over the course of several years. Suddenly, Mary appeared at the threshold of the room and joyfully said that she knew that the young lady would be here today. The girl also smiled sweetly at the maid and asked her what happened. Mary tried to gently scold Erita a little while brushing her hair. The maid did not understand how much one had to love reading to forget about time, because the heroine almost missed her farewell party. Erita apologized and said that she hadn't noticed how time had flown by so quickly. 2 years ago, she and her father had gone north. And today, there is a farewell party, because Erita needs to go to the capital, where the coronation will take place, because she turned 18 years old. Questioning, preparations for the coronation. These days were just a hurricane. The north felt so frozen and lifeless, but thanks to Erita, it became full of energy for many. That's why everyone looked so sad when the heroine left. Mary said that today she had to make the girl absolutely irresistible and therefore ordered her not to even think about resisting. And then the doors to the hall swung open. Everything was ready for the farewell ceremony. The Duke was also beautifully dressed and looked as radiant as ever. When he saw his daughter, he said that she had always been beautiful, but now even more so. The Duke wanted her brother to see her exactly like this. The heroine noticed that her father even dressed in uniform, to which he replied that Erita herself had asked him about this a week ago. They exchanged compliments and got ready to go inside. The guests had already gathered inside. Pleasant music was playing, and everything was just top-notch. A smile immediately appeared on Arita's face from such beauty around. The Duke watched his daughter's reaction and was also pleased. Suddenly, Fern appeared next to him, saying that he couldn't be late for such an event, and also adding that although it was strange to say this, his young lady was already quite grown up. But sometimes her father was still interested in what thoughts were going through her little head and what was keeping her from relaxing. The Duke asked Fern if he knew anything, and then added that if Arita wanted to keep it a secret, he would not pressure her, but only wanted Fern to support her in this. The magic lessons, the research she had been doing since childhood, it was all interesting. The Duke simply asked him to make sure the girl didn't get hurt in the process. Fern exhaled. He realized that Aslan was not aware of her knowledge of black magic and promised that everything would be fine. But Fern warned the heroine that whenever it came to her, the Duke noticed it. However, her smile changes everything and she can do anything. The next day, the girl was already ready for the trip to the capital, and Mary checked whether they had taken everything they needed. Leaving the north after 2 years was a strange feeling, and Arita hadn't really thought about it when she first arrived in the duchy. Today was the day the girl left the north and headed to the capital, following a plot that began too early due to Kalion's return, which happened a year ahead of schedule. Arita had already arrived. She was looking thoughtfully at the mansion she had not seen for so long. Fern lowered his head strangely and told the young lady that this was too much. His body is no longer what it used to be, and it is already very exhausting for him to use teleportation magic, but the girl with a smile told him not to come up with stupid things, because he is still very young. Fern said it was a matter of endurance, to which Aslan replied that if that was the case, then perhaps he should ask the Knight Commander to train Fern. Of course, these were all jokes, and this dialogue was interrupted by Aylan, who had also already arrived at the mansion. Arita and Aslan cried out in joy. They were both overjoyed to see him. The girl immediately threw herself into her brother's arms and said that she missed him very much. The brother immediately began asking her if everything was okay with her during this time. She answered that everything was fine, and also asked how things were going with him. She noticed that Aylan had lost weight compared to the last time they saw each other. But Aylan only patted his little sister on the cheek and said that Arita was still as sweet and beautiful as she had been before. The maids began to whisper. They had never seen Aylan smile like this before, but Arita was already used to it. Father suggested finishing the greeting and heading to the mansion. Aylan supported this idea, since it was already significantly cooler outside, and the family went inside together. The capital is certainly huge. There are many cafes near the mansion. The girl looked at everything that surrounded her with pleasure and admired it. Arita thought about something. When she was little, she only moved between the imperial palace and home. Then she did not notice that people in the capital were not particularly surprised by black hair. Aylan explained that this place was similar to the main duchy, and after all, this was where their family roots were. The further you go from the capital, the more people there are who believe in legends. There aren't many of them in the capital. Stories about black hair being a sign of demonic blood or a curse were just fairy tales here, and only now did Arita understand why Risen, where she grew up, was full of prejudices. At that moment, a woman who worked in this cafe approached the guys. She brought desserts and wished them bon appetit. Aylan wanted his sister to try this sweetness, and as soon as the cake touched her tongue, the girl's eyes immediately opened more in surprise. It was incredibly delicious. The heroine even asked her brother how he found this cafe. Aylan asked someone who lives in the capital, told them that his little sister loves sweets very much, and they recommended this place. Arita was now curious as to who from the capital Aylan might have asked, and assumed it was His Majesty the Second Prince. The guy was a little surprised by this assumption. Meanwhile, Arita was delighted with the dessert and also couldn't stop thinking about the prince. Aylan asked how the girl knew him and added that they met by chance. But Arita didn't understand. What's the difference between meeting by chance and being close? In the original story, Aylan and Kalion were enemies, and Kalion left the capital to go to war 4 years ago. Aylan arrived in the capital 2 years ago. It was unclear when they met. Kalion returned last month. The time of his return is already different from the original story, so it is no longer possible. She still asked her brother how they met, to which he replied that he would tell her later. There were some reasons for this. Arita understood that if she pressed too much, it would be suspicious. Ailan promised to tell her everything later, and the girl took him at his word. A wind picked up outside and blew the girl's hat off her head. It was a hat that her father had given her. It would be a shame to lose it forever. But suddenly she noticed her hat in the hands of an unfamiliar man who caught it and was heading towards Arita. He handed the missing item to the girl, and she thanked him for his help. The young man was wearing a hood and his eyes were covered by his silver hair. Because of this, the heroine could not see his face at all. The stranger said that it looked like someone was waiting for the girl and she should hurry. Arita was a little confused by this situation and began to simply turn around. And at that moment, that stranger simply disappeared and the heroine was left standing alone in the square. She asked Ailan, who approached, who it was, to which he simply suggested that she go back. She tried to distract herself from the situation and not get too much into her head, so she smiled and replied that she was already on her way. But the image of this unknown person still swirled in her thoughts. Was he really in such a hurry, the girl wondered. Meanwhile, that young man stood around the corner and watched the guys. Ailan and Arita sit opposite each other in silence for a while. The girl was happy that, thanks to her brother, she was able to buy a birthday present for her father and really hoped that he would like it. But suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by Ailan calling the girl by name. He handed her some kind of box, the thing that Ailan had bought when they went to buy a present for Dad. It was something he ordered. When Ailan picked this up, he said he would pick up the rest later. Arita asked if her brother was going to open it and see what was inside. She was also interested, but he said that it was time to go. Ailan also added that everything was fine, and he trusted Caden's skills, to which he said that he felt awkward when he was praised. They said goodbye, and Aiden said they would see each other next time. Arita remembered that the man's name was Caden, and it seemed that her brother knew him quite well. She asked if this was not a gift that her brother had bought for their father, to which he replied that he had bought another gift for his father, and this one was for her, and asked him to open it quickly. He wanted to give a gift for the new year, but something had changed. Now Arita remembered that her brother was supposed to come to the north 2 months ago, but he couldn't. Something happened. When the girl opened the box, she saw a beautiful necklace and earrings inside. They were exactly the same color as her eyes, bright purple. The girl exclaimed that she liked it very much, and Ailan was pleased to hear it. He added that this was a belated congratulation on coming of age. She got out successfully, thought Arita, standing in the center of the square. She changed her hair color with magic, so she didn't have to worry about getting sideways glances. Mary was worried that they hadn't even finished yesterday's sightseeing, but she had some things to see too, and she promised to be back before dinner. The girl thought for a moment about where it would be best to start her investigation. Since she didn't know when the original story would begin, she had to collect as many references to black magic as possible. Arita headed to the library. She hadn't been able to find much information, so she didn't have much hope. But since this was the capital, there might be something useful here. 3 years ago, black magic was banned in the Empire, after which most information about black magic was lost. She looked through many books, but there was nothing suitable anywhere. And while walking down the next row of shelves of books, she tripped over a stack of books and almost fell. Arita turned around. It was strange that some of the books were lying on the floor. Maybe it was not just like that. The girl sank to the floor and decided to study in more detail what kind of books these were. And what she saw pleasantly surprised her. She couldn't believe her eyes. It really was a book about black magic. The price of black magic is the soul of the caster, but after many years of searching, black magicians have found a way to avoid self-sacrifice. This method involves sacrificing the soul of a child, and the most effective victim is a still living child under 100 days old, but the heroine already knew this. And there is one more fact that is not mentioned here. If a black magician does not make sacrifices regularly, he will lose his power, so black magicians obsessed with power kidnap children as sacrifices, which leads to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of children. The official number of victims is very high, and the real one is probably even higher, so black magic was banned. In addition, after the ban on black magic, the Empire declared a hunt for black magicians, but they could not find all of them, because they are indistinguishable from ordinary people. If the Empress used black magic, then she probably sacrificed children. Arita carefully read everything that was written. She wanted to learn at least some new information. And suddenly she found something. It was written there. The record I want to leave in this book is a way to identify those who sacrifice children and not themselves. It was a jackpot. The girl was happy with this find and took this book with her. She decided that she needed to go home quickly and finish reading this book. But some people stood in the heroine's way and they turned to her. "Hey, lady, where are you going?" they asked. These guys looked like local hooligans. At first, the girl politely replied that she was in a hurry and asked to be allowed to pass, but they responded quite sharply, saying that they were also in a hurry and asked what to do now. They also said that she needed to go somewhere quickly with them, and this all started to anger Arita. She snapped her fingers and everything around was engulfed in bright flames. The guys screamed, and even one of them fell to the ground in fear. They started screaming that it was a magician. "Well, now let me through," the heroine asked with a smile on her face. They didn't answer and started running away from her as far as possible, only shouting after her that they were very sorry. Apparently this was instead of an apology. She finally exhaled and said that they were lucky. But as soon as the girl was about to go further, she heard a voice behind her that said that she had amazing abilities. She turned around and saw in front of her a familiar man in a black cloak. It was the same guy who helped her not to lose her hat, but who is he? She asked who the young man was, to which he apologized for frightening her and removed his hood. He replied that he was just a passing, peaceful knight. He added that he thought the girl was in trouble and wanted to help, but apparently he didn't have time, since she sorted it out herself. But Arita couldn't shake the feeling that she had seen him somewhere before, and the guy just stood and looked at her. Then he approached the heroine and asked a strange question. Did she like his face? The girl did not lose her head and asked if he really was a knight, as he had said earlier, to which he replied that it was true and that he simply walked from place to place, and that he had been in the capital for a little less than a month. Arita said that she hadn't been to the capital for a long time either. She asked where the knight had been before coming here. He had mostly been in the border areas because the monsters had been rampaging for several years now. The knight asked why Arita was in the capital, calling her a mage. She was a little confused, but then reassured herself that he still didn't know who she was. "I was in the north and came to the capital with my family," the girl answered him. The knight had also been to the north. He came there 4 years ago. He remembers that it was hard to live there. Arita assumed that he suffered because of monsters 4 years ago. But she decided to end this dialogue and said that she would go already so that her family would not worry. At parting, they told each other that they were glad to meet each other and said goodbye. He also added that the next time they saw each other, the girl could call him by his name, Leon. She was a little surprised that he was talking about some next time, but he immediately added, "if fate permits," and smiled sweetly. Arita was a little taken aback by this. Why does she have this feeling that she knows this person? And at parting, she said that if they ever met again, then she would also tell him her name. She said goodbye to the knight once again and began to leave. He also bowed respectfully as a sign of farewell and added that he would look forward to their next meeting. At home, the girl immediately began to study that very book from the library. To create an artifact that recognizes black magicians, certain materials are needed. Once they are ready, the work of high-level magicians is required. The girl didn't understand how they came up with this method. It was too complicated. She started reading about what materials were needed to create the artifact. This is a diamond, considered to be expensive among precious stones. To seal the magic, not any size will do. That is, people without money will not be able to do this. She began to think whether it is worth believing this book at all. But in any case, I decided to just read it for now. For personal purposes, this is more than enough. All this time, Arita tried to change the fate of her family. She used knowledge of the original story, and also the achievements of the main female character, Ayla. She acquired several profitable businesses and 2 talented people in this world. With this level of preparation, it will be much easier to help Kalion. Of course, it would be good if Kalion became a crowned prince without any problems. But if the Emperor appoints Kalion as crown prince, the First Prince's faction will not sit idly by. In preparation, Erit needed to find evidence that the Empress used black magic, which is why she stole Ayla's achievements. The girl hoped that she would understand. The heroine thought that if she sent this letter, she would prepare everything. To finish it in less than a month, it would take some effort, and Arita decided to work hard from tomorrow. Soon, Mary approached the room with a question as to why the heroine had called her. The girl handed her a letter and asked her to deliver it to the Lagras Merchant Guild tomorrow. And after that, she simply plopped down on the bed, exhausted because she was very tired that day. There was too much to do to change her family's fate. If the original story had more details, Arita wouldn't have been in so much trouble. She really wanted to know why her family sided with the first prince. The girl felt sorry for Ayla, but she had no choice if she wanted to save both herself and her family. After all, this world is meant for Ayla, it shouldn't be a big problem. Besides, the original story is already destroyed, the Empress died 8 years ago, and Kalian also returned to the capital a year earlier. 2 large-scale events have already gone wrong. As per the plot, if this is not a catastrophe, then what is it? Thought Irita, lying in bed before going to sleep. In any case, the heroine still has the task of helping Kalian, so she asked not to be offended by her too much. In the morning, a question was asked whether Irita thought it would be better to call the merchants home. The girl replied that everything was fine, she was going to get out and get some fresh air anyway. She asked Mary if the family came looking for her to say that Irita was in the square. The maid asked her not to linger, to which the girl promised to be careful and left. And thoughts continued to spin in her head about what she still had to do. She thought that if she invited the person she was going to meet into her house, it would be a big problem if someone noticed. This would immediately show that she had connections with the Legrasse Merchant Guild. This place never changes, the heroine thought, arriving at the place. There was a man sitting at the table, rummaging through documents and papers. The heroine quietly approached him so as not to scare him and shouted, "Surprise!" She asked the man if he was still obsessed with cleanliness. The man's name was Jurgen. He replied that he was not obsessed with cleanliness, he just liked it when things were in their places. Jurgen also asked that next time she at least say that she was going to come, to which Irita replied that she had sent him a letter. And she added that Mary had sent it in the morning and it should probably arrive very soon. Jurgen Casey is a descendant of impoverished nobles, has an exceptional talent for trade, has some connections, and is now the head of the Merchants Guild. He is one of those who was kidnapped by Irita from Ayla in the original story. With the help of Ayla, Jurgen created his own trade guild, and this guild became the most famous in the empire. He was definitely needed by Irita to get money. The girl knows very little about the future, so she will not be able to organize such a guild on her own. 4 years ago, the heroine approached him and proposed a partnership. Of course, at first he wasn't particularly happy, but now they've been together for 4 years. The girl notes that he was a cutie back then, and she herself was probably too emotional, which is why it happened. "By the way, where is Tyne?" Irita asked him, to which he replied that he needed to go somewhere for a short while, said that it would take about a week, so he should be here today or tomorrow. Suddenly someone came in to see them, and the girl turned around in surprise. It was a young guy. He immediately named the girl's name, also with surprise. It was Tyne. Irita approached him to ask how he was doing. Tyne is a beastman rescued by Ayla, another character that Irita stole from her. Now the wolf leads all the beastmen in the country, and Tane is the heir of this wolf. The girl first met Tane 4 years ago, just like Jurgen at a fighting tournament. There were a lot of people in the hall, and the host on stage announced that today, as always, it would definitely be fun. Irita, like the others, hid her face behind a mask and had a hood on her head. These people looked like they had a title and money. At least he could easily escape if his identity was revealed. They were hiding their faces behind these masks. This arena was a place of entertainment for rich people. Irita considered them disgusting bastards. And those who fought against the beasts and monsters were the beastmen. In the past, there were several different races of beastmen, but the Empire always looked down on them. Eventually, they captured them and made them their subordinates. As a result, the beastmen went far into the forest, away from people, and now only a few races remain. "Let's find out who is the highlight of today's program," the host announced. The star of the arena today is a very rare beastman from a small race. A boy of fragile appearance came onto the stage. His legs were in bonds. This is a beastman, a wolf. It was Tyne. The girl's eyes widened. This was the one she needed. In the original story, Tyne was quite large compared to the others. Irita didn't think he would be so small. "He's still growing, that's why he's so small," the heroine thought. The host began to announce his opponent for today, but suddenly a man sitting next to Irita turned to him. He wanted to say that this beast wolf was the one she was looking for, but Irita herself confirmed this earlier. In this place, the beastmen were used only to make money. Irita hoped that at least they weren't sold here. That's why she said to prepare something. The girl knew that his master had been looking for the monster's heart for 3 years, but she was surprised that he agreed so easily. Irita offered an exchange. And here she stands in front of the beast wolf. The bracelet on his hand caught her eye. The girl noted that it was very good that he was wearing this jewelry. The bracelet is an artifact that Irita gave to Tane. He said he was kidnapped and brought to the arena when he was 5 years old. He damaged his vocal cords and lost his voice. It was too old a wound, so it was too late to heal. Besides, Arita brought him here for the good of her family. She wanted to give him his voice back. Tyne must have been through a lot. The girl thanked him for wearing this bracelet. She also added that she was very sorry that she had to make it in the form of a bracelet, because she wanted to make it in the form of earrings, but she could not make the stone any smaller. Tyne replied that everything was fine. He liked everything that Lady Arita gave him. The girl smiled broadly. She was pleased to hear that. Their dialogue was interrupted by Jurgen asking why Arita had come to him today. In fact, she wanted to ask him for something. When they went out into the city, the streets were quite quiet and empty. He and Tyne went for a walk, and he said that he really wanted to see the girl because so much time had passed. She also said that Tyne had been very busy lately, so there was no opportunity to see him more often. But suddenly she noticed something and stopped in place. There was a man in a black robe standing around the corner of the building. She could see that the man's hair was silver and realized that it was Lian. The girl immediately ran up to make sure it was really him and also wanted to say hello to him and ask some questions. But as soon as she approached that place, there was no one there. Perhaps she just imagined it. Tyne asked her what happened, to which the heroine replied that it suddenly seemed to her that an acquaintance of hers was standing around the corner. In that case, they decided to move on, and Leon was indeed there. He was just hiding, and it looked like he was seriously injured. He could barely breathe and leaned against the wall. He thought that because of family ties, they behaved the same way as the Empress. Leon absolutely did not want to meet the girl in such a state. He pressed his hand tighter on the body so that the blood would not leak onto the ground. He thought that Arita would definitely be worried if she saw the wounds because she was a kind person. Sometimes she may even worry as if it were her own personal problem. In Liana's eyes, Arita literally looked like an angel. That's why he didn't want to cause her pain and inconvenience. But now he didn't know when the effect of the cover magic would wear off, so he couldn't go out. This is definitely not normal. There was sadness in the guy's eyes now, and a lack of understanding of how to do the right thing. Arriving home, the girl fell onto the bed. Today she walked a lot, and, just like every day, a lot of thoughts were spinning in her head. She thought about Liana. She was sure that their eyes met and it couldn't be a vision. Now she clearly saw the guy's gaze at the moment when they crossed paths and realized that he was there after all. Arita couldn't understand why he disappeared. Did he really not want to see her? Or maybe he is deliberately avoiding her. But after all, at all the meetings before this, he approached the girl himself. But suddenly her thoughts were interrupted by others. Why should this bother her at all? Because they don't even know each other. She was even a little angry. It was all because the person she wanted to talk to was avoiding her. The next day after lunch, Arita and her father went for a walk in the garden, and the girls shared that the lunch was very tasty. Their chef Evan promised that he would serve them first class. The girl laughed and said that he probably wanted to show off his skills for his dad's birthday. Suddenly, the heroine stopped and began to look closely at her father. She smiled sweetly and congratulated her father on his birthday. He was very pleased, and Aslan thanked his daughter. He bowed respectfully and added that he really liked the shirt and brooch that she gave him. She sealed the shield and teleportation magic into this brooch. Firstly, the shield magic can block most attacks about 3 times. Secondly, the teleportation should work from the mansion to the square, and now father can use it as much as he wants. Aslan thanked Arita again and said that it was a very nice gift. He promised to take care of it. But suddenly the heroine remembered something and asked them if their father hadn't said that he had invited someone. They turned to the gate and began to stare. A young man stood in front of them. He was in some kind of sad mood. The boy bowed and told Aslan that a lot of time had passed. They headed together to the guest room, where a small table with treats and tea was quickly set up for them. The atmosphere was certainly not pleasant, and Arita thought that if she had known about this earlier, she would have simply gone to her room. After she carefully examined the young man in front of her, it began to seem to her that his face was familiar. The guy noticed the heroine's long and intent gaze, and he even felt awkward, and their eyes even crossed. The guy started fiddling with his fingers, and it seemed like he wanted to ask something. He addressed the girl by name, which surprised her. She didn't understand how he knew her. He just couldn't start a conversation. He just started with the word I and immediately fell silent. Apparently, the guy was afraid to say something. Then he just covered his face with his hand and seemed to be very upset. Erita didn't understand if he was really crying and began to worry that she had said something rude. Aslan decided to start and said that he was still the same crybaby. Erita was probably shocked by this, after which the guy asked for forgiveness and said that tears were flowing from his eyes. The Duke asked him to introduce himself, saying that he thought he was ready. He asked Erita for forgiveness, assuming that she was ashamed of him and his behavior, but the girl replied that everything was fine. The young man bowed respectfully and said that his name was Seon. Seon Vincente Randa, the heroine immediately realized that he was from the Duchy of Vincente. Erita was quite surprised by this, as he added that her mother was his older sister. Seon and Erita sat in the carriage opposite each other and were silent. The girl just looked out the window and didn't understand how she came to this. Seon Vincente is Serbia's younger brother. Erita had never heard of this name before. There was no such character in the original novel. Aslan apologized for not telling his daughter in advance. He hadn't seen Seon in so long that it was unclear whether he would come at all. But Erita tried to smooth things over and said that everything was fine. She was just a little surprised. After all, 14 years had passed, but new thoughts began to appear in her head. But the girl is still not sure how to address the Duke. Aslan thought for a moment and decided to suggest something in this case. Erita accepted her father's offer, but she still didn't know what to say now. He offered to accompany Seon, and while she was there, she could take a look at the capital. They were silent for quite a long time, but Seon's face no longer looked as sad as before. Suddenly, he apologized unexpectedly, which scared the girl a little. He apologized for not rejecting the Duke's offer. He just wanted to get to know Erita better, but didn't think it could burden her. He also added that she would also need time to prepare. She understood that Dad made this proposal so that Seon could agree. In comparison to this, she treated her father rudely. Erita said that she was very sorry and that she just didn't think, but Seon immediately began asking her not to apologize, saying that that was not what he meant at all. Erita's hand suddenly appeared in front of the young man's face and she began a conversation. "Will you come and visit me 3 more times?" Erita asked him in a slightly rude tone, holding her hand with 3 fingers in front of him. The girl had never seen the other members of her family and thought that her whole interaction seemed awkward. She asked if Seon would give her more time to get to know him. She added that after they met 3 more times, she would be able to call him uncle. Tears of joy appeared in his eyes and he thanked the girl. After seeing Seon off, Erita sat in the cafe. As expected, the desserts in this place are the best. But suddenly she noticed something strange out of the corner of her eye and turned around. There was a young man standing outside the window, waving his hand sweetly at her in greeting. Now they were sitting together in a cafe at the same table, and Erita shared that she had not expected to see him here. To which the young man replied that he was looking forward to meeting the heroine, and he constantly addressed her with the word magician. She changed and immediately remembered that meeting when she couldn't catch up with him. Apparently that time it wasn't Leon around the corner, the girl thought. Since that man was clearly unwell or injured, and Leon now looks like he's completely fine. He reminded Erita that last time he asked her for something and asked if she remembered it. Indeed, she remembered, last time she didn't tell the guy her name. She looked down and wondered if that was what he meant. Then the girl asked if she could call him Sir Leon. The guy replied that she could call him whatever she wanted, and was glad that she had not forgotten about the request. But how could she forget? Meeting Leon is the most unusual part of Erita's daily life. She didn't even think that she would meet him again, but now she said her name without hesitation, Erita, to which Leon complimented her, saying that the name was very beautiful. She decided to return the compliment by his name, but noticed a slight confusion on her interlocutor's face. After such an expression on his face, the girl herself was confused and did not know what to say next. She thought that perhaps he did not like his own name. The girl decided to change the subject and asked him why this particular place. He replied that he had been here often before and loved this cafe, but today he was here for the first time since returning to the capital. He added that his mother really liked the desserts served here. Erita wanted to ask him something, but she couldn't get into the mood. She nervously fingered the edge of her cup. And then he said, "Thank you to your mother for the opportunity we have to meet again." After these words, Leon smiled and said that she was right, and that he really should thank his mother for meeting them here today. He reached out to Erita and gently took her wrist. Leon carefully asked about the girl's plans, whether she was free after the cafe. With a trembling voice, he asked if he could steal her time. This question immediately caused a slight blush to appear on the girl's cheeks, and her heart began to beat so fast that it became scary. "Our meeting? It must be fate," said the young man as they walked. But now the couple had already arrived at the very place where Leon wanted to go. He really hoped that the girl would like this place. She was truly surprised by what she saw. From here you can see the entire capital, and Leon wanted to show Erita this particular place. The girl thanked him for such a beautiful view. But suddenly something else caught the heroine's attention. It was a rather old tree with a thick trunk. Leon said that he heard that it had stood here for more than 300 years. Such information surprised Erita. He also added that there was a story related to this and asked if she wanted to hear this story. Leon heard this story from his mother, so he doesn't know for sure if it's true or not. He looked up to the very top of this huge tree. 300 years ago, according to legend, tears of the sun god fell on the place where this tree grew. On the night when the destruction of black magicians was announced, a white beam of light descended here. The tree that grew was very small at first. It was so white that in the night it seemed as if it was emitting light. The tree that grew from the tears of the sun god sounded like a myth, of course, but at the same time it was very romantic. As they were walking back, Erita shared that she had really enjoyed spending the day like this with Leon, and he reciprocated. But now the moment had come when it was time to disperse, but they decided to stand for a while longer. "When can we meet again?" the young man asked. Erita clenched her hands in surprise, because she didn't know what to answer. She can't promise anything yet because for now they both have secrets from each other. But then an interesting thought came into her head and she wanted to voice it. When accidents happen 3 times, it is already fate. Then Leon promised that they would definitely meet again, but for now he couldn't say when that would be. The Baron's office, he sits and does paperwork in silence. Suddenly he was distracted by an extraneous sound. Apparently someone was about to enter his room. "Your Highness," says the guy who entered, "this is Leon." The man immediately jumped up and started shouting why it was taking so long, but Liana was not embarrassed. He calmly began asking how he was doing and added that the uniform suited him very well. The man was furious that Leon was 2 hours late and remained so calm, but the boy replied that there was a reason for it. "Maybe something good happened in the Information Guild?" Leon asked. He said that he didn't find much information, but the man didn't believe it. Because Leon was smiling so much, he had never seen him like that before. The guy was thinking about something, as if he wanted to tell something. But then he replied that he had forgotten something because he suddenly had a headache. It seemed like the time he spent with Erita was better than he thought. A voice came from behind the door calling for dinner, but there was no time. Leon's uniform had already been prepared, and he needed to change quickly. His brother would arrive soon. This information saddened the young man a little. His Highness the Second Prince has arrived. He immediately turned to his brother, saying that a lot of time had passed, but it seemed that he was not very happy to meet. They exchanged a few words, saying that they were glad that everything was fine with each other. "You know I'm always worried about you," his brother said. To which Kalian answered him the same. It was a disgusting conversation, very feigned and hypocritical. Meanwhile, Erita was sitting in her room and was very busy with some painstaking work. One wrong move, and it could all be over. She couldn't let all her efforts just go to waste, so she was very focused. The diamonds needed to create the artifact were given to her by Jurgen, but he gave them to her with a little indignation and a question about what the girl was going to do with so many of them. But it will be difficult to put 5 layers of magic on such a small stone. Even though diamonds are strong, Erita still needs to be very careful. Suddenly, the stone lit up, and the heroine jumped slightly in place from surprise and joy. The next 4th layer has also been created. Now there is only 1 left. She didn't want to overdo it, so she decided to stop for today and leave this work. Suddenly, Mary entered the room and said that she had brought snacks. Erita was happy about this because she was on a break right now, and the maid said that the Duke had bought these treats just on the way. This made the girl even happier, because these were the same desserts from Erita's favorite cafe in the capital. While she was enjoying the delicious food, she thought that Leon also said that this was his favorite cafe and that he liked their desserts. Just think, Leon treated her as if nothing had happened, the heroine thought in her head. And while she was eating, it occurred to her that he was definitely the man in the alley, but it was unclear why he ran away. Erita decided that she needed to ask him about that meeting. Mary noticed that the girl's expression had somehow changed to sadness and asked if maybe she didn't like the treats. Irita replied that everything was fine. She was just thinking about one of her friends, and Mary immediately became interested. Irita began to describe the situation as if she had nothing to do with it. She said that this friend of hers had met someone a couple of times. They knew each other's names and even walked together. And one day she went to the square and saw this man. But he immediately seemed to evaporate, and she thought that their eyes met. Irita looked at the maid with a smile and asked her opinion about this situation. Mary immediately realized what was going on and asked if the person you met was a man or not. Before Irita could even respond, the woman began to scream and swear, saying that she shouldn't date such a person. The girl tried to calm the maid down. She said that this story was definitely not about her. And then there was a knock on the door of the room. Irita allowed them to enter with a smile. It seems she was even amused by Mary's reaction. The heroine was informed that the Duke was looking for her. When she entered her father's office, he handed her a letter and said that it was from the Marquise. And he added that he asked the Duke to deliver it personally to Irita. He also said that he really liked the gifts from the girl, but she met with Seon 2 more times after his last visit. One time Seon came himself, and another time Irita visited him, and when she went to see him, she gave him a scarf with her embroidery. She knew he would like a homemade gift better. She was happy with the response. It was a great choice. But the Duke also brought a gift from Seon for Irita. The heroine was surprised and immediately began to unpack to see what was inside. Her eyes widened even more when she saw that inside this beautiful box were such beautiful earrings. They must be terribly expensive. She immediately showed her father what was inside and began to praise such a gift. The Duke was sorry that Seon could not see her reaction, but nevertheless, he was glad in any situation when his daughter smiled. Irita decided that she needed to hurry up and write him back immediately to thank him for such beauty. The blonde was walking quickly somewhere and was mentally angry and calling Kalion all sorts of unkind words. He was heading to his mother for a serious talk. They sat down at a table in a beautiful garden to have a cup of tea before talking. Thesis, the woman called him by name, and he sat opposite in a terrible mood. His mother informed him that it looked like His Majesty would announce the next crowned prince at the upcoming ball, and Thesis's eyes widened. But according to imperial history, the announcement of the crowned prince must take place on the day of the foundation. The queen looked menacingly at her son and said only one word to him, Prince. Thesis sadly lowered his head, and beads of sweat began to flow down his face. He also noted to her with one word, forgive. She understood perfectly well that the emperor would not allow her beloved son to take the throne so easily, but she knew one thing, that he had to be there, and she promised that she would provide him with this place. She reached out her hand to his face to hug him and told him not to worry about anything, because he was her beloved son, but for some reason he tried to distance himself from her. Her face looked very sinister at that moment, and she promised that Asila's son would never take his place. Yes, I understand. Thesis answered sadly again and lowered his head. He had nothing else to answer, and he also couldn't contradict his mother. Finally finished, Irita happily held in her hands the artifact she had made herself. It took some work. She was worried that she wouldn't make it in time for the ball, but not only did she manage to finish on time, but Jurgen also made such a beautiful watch out of it. In 3 days, the original story will begin. The heroine was very anxious inside because of this, but she was ready. Considering how distorted the circumstances are now, the continuation will probably be completely unpredictable. Irita had prepared everything so carefully, but she didn't understand why she was so nervous. The girl hoped that everything she had prepared would be useful. Mary said that the festival would start today. Irita was still standing on the balcony. She wanted to put all her thoughts together and calm down. And in the evening, she decided to go out and get some fresh air. The festival was bigger than she expected, and there were a lot of people. The girl decided to move away a little to watch the fireworks, and she also needed to hide her hair color so as not to stand out from the crowd. The boys running past her accidentally touched her. They were in a great hurry to get closer to the fireworks so that they wouldn't take up space. And because the heroine lost her balance because of this, she hit her face into some passerby, who immediately asked her if everything was okay. Raising her head, the girl immediately recognized Leon. Just think, the girl had disguised herself. She didn't understand how he could recognize her, especially in such a crowd. The guy's answer was not long in coming. He recognized the girl by her eyes. There was silence between them for a while. The girl was embarrassed by such words and by the next meeting in general. Meanwhile, the fireworks had already started, and Arita immediately turned around to look at this beauty. Everyone around was delighted and silently enjoyed it. But Arita seemed to have an idea, and she turned to Sir Lian and asked him if he thought it would be enough. She just snapped her fingers and the fireworks increased tenfold. The entire sky lit up with bright colors. People around couldn't believe their eyes. They asked each other if they could see it and shared their opinion that this year everything was much cooler than before. Lian noted that Arita was still kind and dropped his head in embarrassment at his own words. Nothing had changed since that day. He held in his hand that same bracelet, the lucky bracelet she had given to Kalion when they first met. Then she said that maybe it was superstition, but if he had this bracelet, it would definitely bring good luck. And now they were just standing next to each other and enjoying the view. The heroine didn't even realize that she had known this man for quite a long time. He couldn't delay any longer, and today he wanted to tell the girl everything. He had to reveal his true identity. He turned to Arita, saying that today he had to tell her something. Such words greatly surprised the girl. He hesitated for a long time and didn't know how to present it correctly. But suddenly passers-by and everyone who was at the festival began to whisper and talk to each other, pronouncing the name of Arita. They said that somewhere here there was Lady Crova Hearts. The girl said that she was mistaken for someone else, and they immediately decided to run away from sight. But Arita suddenly stopped him. She noticed something. The girl said that he dropped something and rushed to pick it up, but in fact it was a bracelet by which she would immediately understand everything herself. The guy's face immediately changed. He was scared because he wanted to tell her everything himself and didn't know how she would take this information now. This bracelet was now in Arita's hand. Suddenly she would get angry that Kalion deceived her, posing as another person. Arita immediately realized that this was the bracelet she had given to the main male character at the Empress's funeral. She looked up at Lian and didn't even know what to say to him. Her hands and legs were shaking from it. She didn't understand how she could not recognize those blue eyes. After all, she saw them when she was little, the same eyes as the main male character. Arita remembered that every time they met, he called her a magician, which meant that he knew about everything from the very beginning. The heroine immediately turned around and was about to leave. As a parting gesture. She only apologized for her rudeness. Lian tried to stop her. He reached out and almost managed to grab the girl, but she suddenly disappeared, and only some magical images remained in front of him. He stood in the middle of the street for a while and tried to digest everything that had happened in his head. The guy was very hurt and offended that everything had turned out exactly this way. He punched the wall with all his might. He regretted it and didn't want this outcome. After all, he himself planned to tell this today. The truth is that he is Kalion Ruin Elver and they have already met. He even had a dialogue prepared in his head for this. He wanted to say something like, "Forgive me for hiding my identity all this time." Now he thought that the heroine would not forgive him for this deception. He had the opportunity to tell the truth, but he could not force himself. If only he knew that everything would turn out like this, he would have told me later. Kalion consoled himself that everything was fine, and he would still have a chance in 3 days. He had to explain everything to Arita. The next day, Arita sat at the table and had breakfast, but she was thinking about only one thing. Lian turned out to be Kalion. She fingered his bracelet, or rather her lucky bracelet. She didn't expect to meet him again. Kalin knew from the very beginning who Arita was, but if it weren't for the bracelet, she wouldn't have been able to recognize him. The girl didn't understand why he needed to hide his identity and specifically get to know her. Maybe he wanted to get some information from Arita, but they didn't really talk about it. In any case, the girl was very upset. You can't deceive people like that. Arita thought he was a good person, but she tried to push thoughts about this man away from her. They weren't even close, so she should stop feeling betrayed. But to put it into words, Lian was just a pleasant conversationalist, and she also knew that he was hiding something. She decided that the next time they saw each other, she would act as if it was their first meeting. That should work. And so the day of the ball arrived. The weather outside was pleasant and sunny, and the whole castle was bathed in the rays of the sun. Arita was already ready. The dress fit her perfectly, but she was a little worried that she had overdone it with her look. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice that said that when she was born, she was so tiny. She saw her father in front of her, a smile shining on his face, because his daughter looked so beautiful, and he himself was not bad. He added again that Arita had grown so much and he was so proud of her. Aylan was already waiting for them at the entrance, and Aslan suggested that they all go into the hall together. Now all three of them were standing on the threshold and getting ready to enter. From the moment Arita crossed the threshold, it seemed like the prologue of the original story began. The girl held her father's arm tightly. It made her feel calmer. And as soon as the original story begins, Ayla will also come. By the will of fate, she will meet Kalion. And these two will fall in love with each other. Arita knew she couldn't lose control and make a mistake. She definitely needed to keep a cool head. And before entering, her father asked her not to forget that Aylan and he were always nearby and would always be on her side. The heroine was very grateful to her family for such words and for their constant support. Thanks to the two of them, she was truly happy. And no matter what happened, she also promised to always protect the two of them. They entered the hall where they were already introduced. Duke Aslan Crowahearts of the Duchy of Crowahearts, Sir Aylan Crowahearts and Grand Duchess Crowahearts. They stopped as people immediately started approaching them and greeting them. Among them was Ceylan, whom they did not expect to see. He noted that this was probably not Arita's first public appearance, so he had to come and help. He asked the girl if she was very worried, to which she replied that everything was fine and that she thought she would be more worried. But in reality, she was worried for other reasons that she couldn't voice yet. She needs to use the artifact to find out what kind of black magic the Empress used, but to use it on the Empress, she needs to be at least 5 steps away from her. We need to get closer to her. There is less than a week left and Arita will not have another chance to be alone with her except at this banquet. The girl heard that they were beginning to introduce the next guests, the most noble luminary of the Empire. Her Majesty Empress Aisha Renison and His Majesty Thesis Ruin Elver, First Prince, they have arrived. This announcement made our heroine tense up considerably. The Empress and Thesis, she began to feel scared. For the past 8 years, faces that cannot be forgotten have been ordered to raise their heads. The Empress began her speech. But then he entered the hall, His Highness the Second Prince, Kalion Ruin Elver. Of course, Arita simply couldn't help but direct her gaze at him. It really was him, Kalion, or as was more usual, Sir Leon, but they simply missed each other and both pretended not to know each other. The dancing began. The men began to invite the ladies. Everything looked very beautiful and solemn. Arita turned to her brother and offered to take care of her. Of course he wouldn't refuse his sister. Aylan bowed and extended his hand. It was an invitation to dance. Irite felt much calmer this way because she had a loved one next to her. During the dance, he noted that his sister began to dance much better, and it was all thanks to Aylan, who sometimes worked with her. But even while dancing, Arita could not tear her eyes away from Kalion. However, his expression was so cold, now he seemed to her like a completely different person. But the Kalion that the heroine knew was a gentle and kind man. These thoughts simply did not give the heroine any peace, but she must remember that now her mission is different. But she still continued to think that maybe this was his true essence, maybe the Kalion she knew was just a mask. Arita tried to pretend that she didn't care about him, but it wasn't that easy. Aylan, of course, noticed the girl's thoughtfulness and asked her what was the matter. But she couldn't answer her brother this time. But she noticed that her father was literally drilling them with his menacing gaze and jokingly said that Aylan's back was probably hot. The guy laughed and replied that he was like a villain who kidnapped the princess, but as soon as he won the duel, Arita asked if he was going to take on everything again like last time. Being responsible for his sister's debut in society was not such a bad price to pay, he replied. In the middle of the evening, the girl went out onto the balcony to get some fresh air, and she also needed to think about some thoughts. She danced only 3 times and already felt so tired. After all, she danced Seon. Dancing is also a kind of work. Arita looked into the distance and thought that the masquerade was supposed to take place in 3 days. If she wants to secretly approach the Empress, this is the best moment. This is the day when the most people will gather in the palace. The mask would hide her face, but what to do with her hair, Arita thought. Using magic was too dangerous. Someone might see her using it. She needed to think some more, but suddenly someone's voice called out to her. It was Tane, the very same beast wolf. Arita was surprised to see him there and immediately asked how he got there. He asked to wait and abruptly darted around the corner as if hiding from someone. But a second later, he was already on the balcony next to Aroida, who didn't even have time to track where he went and was looking for him below. Tyne said that he didn't notice anyone on the way here, so there was no need to worry. And then he added that at least there was no one within his line of sight. Well, if Tyne says it so confidently, then it must be true. Purebred werewolves have outstanding abilities. But the heroine still had a question about why he came here. The thing was that Jurgen urgently asked her to pass something on to the girl. He also said that if he mentioned her, Erita would immediately understand everything, and the girl began to look at the papers that were handed to her. It was impossible. It said there was no such person as Ayla Diane. Baron Diane and his wife had only one son, Eli Diane. They had no other children. Erita was in complete shock. Had Ayla really disappeared? The ball continued and was in full swing. The Empress, together with her sons, sat on the throne as expected and watched everything carefully. Erita had already returned to everyone and met with her brother, with whom they exchanged sweet smiles. But suddenly she felt a gaze on her, so familiar and tender, which simply drilled into her from head to toe. A false name, a false identity. He himself knew that Erita would one day learn the truth, but he still succumbed to the sweet temptation of the moment. And how wrong he was that he could restrain himself. What he wanted most now was to rush to her and tell her everything. But now he didn't have such an opportunity, because if he did so, the Empress would immediately notice everything. Kalion knew he needed to talk to the girl where no one could hear them. Officially, there is no connection between him and the Grand Duchess. He wanted only one thing, for her to stay away from this dirty struggle, in a clean and safe place. Erita sat in her room and hoped that Jurgen was still awake. She urgently needed to know something. The main character disappeared without a trace. What is going on? The search for Ayla was going well. Jurgen even said that he would soon be able to meet her. It would have been better if it had just been Jurgen's mistake. Fortunately, the heroine had a special magic ball with which she could contact him. And finally, the image of Jurgen appeared before her, and he called out Erita's name. She immediately apologized for disturbing him so late, but the man was expecting this call, so he did not sleep. He just wanted to ask about the case of Isla Dean. He asked the heroine who she was. The man found her name in a notebook with important assignments. But he remembers absolutely nothing about her. Erita could not believe how Jurgen, who had recently been looking for Ayla, could forget about her existence. As Erita herself understands, this is simply impossible from a logical point of view. If Jurgen had not written down this matter, he would have simply left it unattended. But after seeing the recordings, he sent the report to the heroine. However, no matter what he tried to remember about Ayla Diane, his head was empty. He did not remember who she was and why Erita instructed him to find her. It was surprising, but Jurgen really couldn't remember a single detail. There was just silence between them for a while. Erita just looked at him and couldn't understand anything. But then the man said that he knew that the girl was hiding something, trying to pretend that everything was fine, but in reality, she was burdened with a heavy burden. And now he wanted to ask if she really didn't trust him that much. He thought he could help Erita bear at least some of this burden. But he immediately apologized and asked to forget what he had just said. Apparently he was just tired and became irritable. He was also going to conduct his own investigation and wished the heroine good night, but she continued to sit in the same place for some time without moving in her thoughts. She thought about how she could confess and say that in fact she was not Erita Crovaharts, and this world was just a story from a book. But she simply loved the family she found in her second life too much. She just wanted to save them. She knew for sure that it would not be easy, but the heroine did not imagine that it would be so scary and lonely. She is scared. She does not understand what is happening and cannot stop the flow of tears that flows from her eyes like a stream and interrupts her thoughts. She even began to think that it was her fault that the Ilda had disappeared, and this made her feel very bad. All this fear was like a reminder that she was a stranger here. The girl fell asleep crying at her desk, which her father and Ayla noticed, and he had told her so many times not to cope with everything alone. He carefully picked up his daughter in his arms and headed towards the bed. He clearly understood that it was hard for her now, if this had happened. Aslan covered her with a blanket and, stroking her face, wished his child sweet dreams. Elan asked what his father was going to do now, to which he replied that Erita didn't want them to know about it, so they had no choice. But they knew about everything that Erita did, about her connection with the Legrasse Guild, and that she was studying black magic. They knew that the reason for everything was the secret she was hiding. Erita, what are you hiding? The question was spinning in the head of her brother, who stood and looked at the sleeping girl. He only wanted to help her. And that very image that was near the tree on the mountain, Leon spoke about it. This silhouette of a woman slowly approached Arita. She put her hand to her head and gently stroked it. "My sweet girl, I'm sorry I put this burden on you."